Parallel Planets podcast.
Welcome to the Parallel Planets podcast. I'm here with Neil Nixon. Neil, I know a bit about you already because we chatted uh, at the Weird Weekend North Expo, or whatever you call it. And I also heard your excellent talk on Elvis Presley being a pathway to the strange. But for those listeners that are not affiliated with your work, maybe you could just explain who you are, what you do, and then we'll move on to how you got into it and stuff in a bit as well, if that's all right with you.
Okay, my name's Neil Nixon. I've been involved in paranormal research and similar things, writing about it and talking about it for since in my 20s, basically. But latterly, in the last 5 years, I've got much more involved again because I packed up my academic career, which has given me half a week doing corporate PR for a company I've been working for a while, and then the rest of the time I'm free to do live talks, writing and research, and a lot of that has been about the paranormal. So in the last few years I've had a couple of books out, one on UFOs and one on mystery, and particularly at the moment with the live talks, I'm actually really busy. So by default now I'm researching all the time. I can't help it because it's in the nature of it, of doing live talks, particularly on the paranormal, that you can't get out the room without somebody telling you the strangest thing that ever happened to them. So I'd have to say, whilst there are occasional curveballs in the middle of all of this, like things that you can't begin to explain that just take you off in another tangent, I've probably not enjoyed any part of my working life as much as the present time.
Brilliant, brilliant. And so you were just saying about how when you're doing talks and stuff, which is obviously a big part of a massive part of your life now, people tend to share their strangest stories with you. So you getting up and being so open about talking about these things is almost like a gateway for people to come up to you and tell you things. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
which it always has been. I mean, you probably know this. If anybody's interested, really interested in the paranormal, the nature of it is that other people come to know about that, and then you can't help that people come forward and tell you about it. And because I was a professional academic, I was in places that were always crowded with other people, so that became well known. But latterly, since I've started getting back out and doing the live gigs, I should have probably seen one particular part of this coming, but I didn't. But um, your bread and butter as a live speaker, particularly in a normal week, is that you'll get booked during the day by groups of people who aren't working, which by default means that they're often retired. So, for example, in a couple of days' time, I've got a fairly big U3A group to go and talk to. And consequently, because a lot of these people are older, I'm gathering reports now, which are of the nature of stuff that was in the UFO literature I grew up reading, which was published in, say, in the 1970s. So I've met people in the not too distant past, for example, who've seen the kind of the UFOs that were shaped like spindles or things like that, which you just don't see anymore. Um, I mean, a couple of things that in the last few weeks, I did a talk where there's a woman who's 81, and I turned up a witness to the thing called the Westmolling incident, it was in the kind of second division of Great British UFO cases. Um, so it's one of the ones that the MOD almost got excited about this, but this happened in November 1953. And I found a witness to it who's previously unknown witness. So I put her in touch with Bufora, who've got the biggest case file of anybody on that particular incident. And then I've just in the last couple of days, I've been in the local paper, and that's given me somebody who I knew actually. I didn't know that this person had a UFO experience, has got back in touch with me with a quite an odd flying triangle sighting. It's not an odd sighting. It's very typical of the kind of things that were reported for a long, long time. What's weird about it is when it occurred. It was 2016. They were pretty much dead in the water. So, you get all these little bits and pieces. And that's without going into it in huge detail. Obviously, I've got ideas all the time, and I'm quite knowledgeable about this subject now, but it's led me more and more to be interacting with researchers who are experts in certain things, and maybe like the Flying Triangle one, I discussed it with the local UFO research group based down on the Isle of Thanet, because I knew that they'd gathered a lot of these, that those sightings were taking place around the end of the last century down there. And this is a really odd one. Not that it, like I say, it's not an odd, it's a pretty mundane sighting in many ways, but it's a weird thing to be happening in 2016. They were pretty much dead and done by then.
What, the triangle UFOs haven't been seen for a long time? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
they're
Yeah.
kind of, well, without, I haven't spoken to the witness about sharing the specifics of this, but the kind of sighting that she's reporting is very old school. But there's no, because I know this person, there's absolutely no doubt she simply would have been too young to have mistaken a sighting in the 1990s for 2016. Yeah.
Yeah.
Apart from anything else, when it all kicked off, she wasn't born. So she couldn't possibly have been a witness to the early ones and mistaken it.
I see. It's nice how it works like that, though. Sort of, someone sees you say, talk at a U3A meeting, then that leads on to something that's happened in a certain area, and then you're in the newspaper, and then someone reads that, and then it leads on to something else. Very
Yeah,
organic,
it,
isn't it?
it does. And obviously now that I'm back out there and I'm not burdened by having a regular career kind of job, I've got much more time to network and liaise with people, and just when I get interested in something, just literally follow up my own kind of hunches on that. And I'm less bothered than I was about. So I've always written for a living. Even when I had a professional academic job, I always had things going on the side. But I'm less bothered now about chasing the money jobs. It's less of a necessity. So it's given me the excuse to go off if things just present themselves and I get interested in something. How to put it? I just basically make it my business to go and research and write about it and do presentations, and then find people who'll work with me on it. So, I just I chase more kind of niche magazines and things like that if I've got a particular hunch about something. So I haven't submitted it yet, but I've just done an academic paper for a joint project between University of Durham and the University of Sydney. One's masterminding the book, the other one's masterminding the conference. But it's on how the world would cope if we had absolutely irrefutable proof of an alien signal, for example. Now that's pretty niche. I can't imagine somebody stopping me in the street and demanding a selfie because I wrote that. But on the other hand, it's what you can get away with at this stage of your working life, and that's led me to be in touch with. I've always had an interest in that kind of thing, so it's led me to be in touch with certain people who would know more than me about particular parts of that, which has been great.
How would the world cope if there was a irrefutable alien signal,
Well,
do you think?
well, it'll take at the minimum an entire book and a conference to explore that, but
Yeah.
keeping it simple, the paper I pitched to them without giving too much away.
No, of course, yeah.
Um, I'm I, I've read, I'm quite well up on the kind of the social science to do with paranormal research groups and stuff. So, for example, one of the things I've looked at in the paper, and this is something I feel quite strongly, is that if various UFO groups were presented with the fact that there was absolutely irrefutable proof of an alien signal and it didn't correspond with their own UFO beliefs, the first thing they'd do is dig down. They'd dig
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
They'd start claiming fake news or cover up, and that they'd push harder for disclosure.
Yeah.
Oh, man, this is it's an absolute box of frogs kit, but
Yeah.
there are propensities to paranoid belief among paranormal groups and stuff, and they're often turning on each other. I mean, as we're sitting and talking to each other at the moment, the big sort of story in the UK in that is that the state of the research group ASAP is chaotic, to say the least. And other groups have imploded over the years. So that's one of the things I'm looking at in the paper. And then the other thing I'm looking at in the paper is how the alien signal that we detect might be the very last thing we imagine. That it wouldn't be the history of sci-fi, and what SETI are looking for is literally an intelligent civilization sending a message out. Yeah. Well, another possibility is that we simply wake up to the fact that we've been surrounded by this all along, that actually
Mm,
it's about consciousness and where consciousness comes from when we tap into something.
mm.
So that I found that really interesting. I mean, this is pretty niche, isn't it? But I found that really interesting in as much as I had to read into some of the academic literature on things like the way that First Nations people have always seen the landscape as being alive and the cosmos as being alive. Um, and one way that we might detect aliens is to realize that they were right.
Yeah, yeah. So, that's interesting you mentioned First Nations because I remember part of your book about a ghost dance or something. Is it in chapter two or three that spread across and it became almost like a mass hysteria in in the USA.
Sorry, what
Um,
was that?
yeah, oh, I should have made a note of it to be honest. It's oh, here it is. Here's a photo. The Wovoka dance. Remember that
Oh
in your
yeah,
book? Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
the dancing that became a mass hysteria thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's interesting. That's probably not a good example in as much as whilst it became a mass hysteria thing and it led First Nations, i.e. the indigenous Americans, to believe that they could be impervious to bullets. That
Right.
was not a great
Yeah,
success.
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I could give you there's a something I read recently in a book called The First Astronomers, which is really interesting because it's a kind of object lesson in how we might disregard First Nations wisdom a bit in an offhand way. Long story short, but there was a tribe, a South American tribe in Peru that for years used to climb a particular hill, and the people who were initiated into the kind of shamanic belief in the tribe would talk more or less talk to the stars, and the stars would tell them how the harvest was going to go in that particular year. So on the one hand, this looks like just, you know, kind of hokey folk wisdom that's going to mean nothing. The problem that Western science had with this was that their ability to forecast the harvest was uncannily good. The stars seemed to be telling them exactly what they needed to know, and particularly with regard to a potato harvest, they were just, it was improbable that they would get lucky for that long. Long
Oh,
story short, it's only fairly recently that Western science has actually realized what was going on. So what was being intuited by the elders of the tribe and the people that they were training in this was about the way the stars spoke. And literally it was about looking at the stars, almost getting into a meditative state and perceiving what was going on as they twinkled and spoke to them. Well, in actual fact, that was right. It just the stars, balls of gas, hundreds of millions of miles away, were not literally speaking. But what was going on, which the tribe didn't know, was that it was to do with the humidity in the air, and specifically it was to do with the El Nino current, right?
yeah.
Which obviously the tribe knew nothing about. But the El Nino has a massive impact on weather events in that part of the world all the time. So they'd stumbled into this, and that effectively they'd learned that if the stars presented in certain ways, it would tell them things about the forthcoming seasons and the rain and everything, and that would
Yeah.
help them to make decisions about what to plant. And it was really good. And so
Yeah.
there is that's a really that there's nothing paranormal about that. Although at the time it was literally paranormal because clearly they were getting wisdom from the stars, and we understand it now. But the point I'm making, if you like, is that there is a lot of indigenous belief, and it's interesting that some really interesting academic work is coming out about that. If I drop names and your viewers could check this out.
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
So there's a woman called D.W. Pasulka or Diane Pasulka, she's a professor of religious studies in the United States, but she's now written two books looking at contact one way or another with alien intelligences. And a guy called Philip Goff wrote a book called Why not long ago. And he's probably Britain's most prominent panpsychist. He believes crudely that the universe is alive and sentient, and we're a very small part of it.
Yeah.
Now, I really don't know what to make of all of that, but it's what I'm getting away with now, looking into all that stuff. Yeah.
What it's interesting is, did you, because it's like, there must have been one came first, because usually so I have a passing interest in First Nation, especially in North America. I've got some books on it. But then sometimes I find reading those things, because of the spiritual beliefs some of them have, it does feed into what we maybe in the UK would refer to as paranormal beliefs or supernatural, definitely. So did one come
Yeah.
first for you, or did they just sort of organically feed into each other, the two subjects, broad subjects,
Um,
obviously?
well, probably, if I'm honest, I've gone back to the sort of First Nation stuff, and I mean, you were waving that Why Mystery Matters book around earlier, so um, I came to that's an argument in a very simple form that we're all better off mentally and physically if we grapple with things that are bigger and more complicated than we can understand.
Yeah,
And what brought me to that was that once I got a lot of time to get back into the paranormal investigation and UFOs, particularly UFOs, there are certain things I can't deny. I meet people all the time who've had bizarre paranormal experiences.
yeah,
The vast majority don't want publicity, they want to share it. What's common with their experiences is that they've been in some way life-changing and they've been very intense and often quite surreal. So they seldom fit the kind of off-the-shelf model that you see on Blaze and Quest documentaries the whole time, right?
yeah,
Um, and so I can't deny what people are telling me, and I really struggle with the kind of team skeptic, team believer approach, which is great for television, but it doesn't allow for anything in the middle, which is
I
that you
agree.
might be
Yeah,
skeptical of the ways of explaining it, but you can't really
yeah,
deny that there are paranormal experiences going on.
I
And
agree.
that's led me to read all the, almost by default, then you start asking yourself, what could explain it? If it's not nuts and bolts UFOs landing from Zeta Reticuli, which in my humble opinion, it probably isn't. And,
Mm.
if anybody were to disagree with me, the least I would suggest is that you go and look at the long and not very great history of all the big cases that were supposed to absolutely prove this, i.e. Roswell. There is a huge amount of evidence that debunks it and says it
Yeah.
was fourth launch of Project Mogul. The Botswana sky crash at the end of the 1980s
Oh
is an
yeah.
interesting but glorious piece of nonsense. The MJ12 documents, the Gulf Breeze case, my work in life in ufology has been peppered by these massive cases that were apparently going to prove it once and for all, none of which ever did.
Mm.
And a lot of which showed up the kind of limitations of what they call the ETH, the alien hypothesis, extraterrestrial hypothesis, basically. So that's led me to look for things that might potentially explain what I'm encountering on a regular basis now, and which has put me back in touch with people that I've been rubbing shoulders with for ages. But it'll keep me enthralled and entertained and chasing mystery for as long as I can do anything, I think.
Definitely. Yeah. What I always say to people is, and I realised there were quite a lot of people at the conference we were at in April who think the same. Is just because I'm interested in all this doesn't mean I believe it all.
No.
I've had so many people who don't have any interest in the paranormal, the strange, the weird, whatever, who just immediately go, "Oh, I'm calling bollocks on this. This is nonsense," you know. And I'll go, "Yeah, but just because because you overheard me listening to this podcast or saw me reading this book doesn't mean I believe everything." But it also doesn't believe that I disbelieve everything
Oh,
as well. Sorry, what have you got to say to that?
well, similar, Kit. I've come to. I'm going to say. I've I've come to a similar conclusion to what one or two of the great Greek philosophers came to at the end of their life, that I realized just how little I know.
Yeah.
Um, and I can't deny that there are genuine paranormal experiences being foisted on people whether they want them or not, day in, day out.
Yeah.
Um, so it sounds like a cop out, and I think it's actually a very defendable position that I'm with people. One person who's with me on this is Anne Stryber, wife of Whiteley Stryber, who
Mm.
wrote all those
Communion.
abduction things.
Yeah.
She once stated that she thought the human race was too young to say that it knew that it really understood things. Yeah,
Mm.
that we need better questions, and I totally agree with that. And I think that my own take on it is that we'll understand more about the stuff that gets people excited about the paranormal when we understand more about quantum theory and consciousness, particularly, right?
Mm,
Both separately and together.
mm.
And certainly we understand so little about the universe that at the moment, within reason, all bets are on, that it could
Yeah.
be multidimensional, it could be holographic, it may be none of those things. That we we come up with theories that make sense to ourselves, but we're often in danger of, anthropomorphizing things, making it centered on human beings the whole time.
Yeah.
Um, and by the same token, we probably don't begin to understand our own consciousness, and which means that it's possible that it might be being acted on by something in a conscious way from outside. It's possible we're colliding with unusual things. So in the middle of all that mess, I've occasionally found things I think are such astute observations, I won't let them go. So
Mm,
Why Mystery Matters discusses something, doesn't it? The William James, and he codified, this is 1902, he codified mystic experiences
mm,
that he was thinking about this in a book called The Varieties of Religious Experience, which is a massive thing, which is a whole series of lectures. But in the middle of one of those, he discusses that mystic experiences are uncanny, that there's something that we just can't begin to understand. They're noetic, so we tend to walk away from them with some renewed knowledge, some increased knowledge. They're often transitory, they don't last very long, and they're involuntary. By and large, these things just come to people. And certainly in the nature of a lot of the things that are reported to me, all that would be true. Now,
mm.
William James was talking about mysticism in the case of, like, look, in the widest context about religion. But the same things are happening to people all the time, and they don't perceive them as religious. We're certainly prone to having those kind of surreal experiences. Um, and so that's one of the nuggets that I kind of hang on to. I
Mm.
find I think his codification is actually very useful to understand a whole broad range of paranormal experiences.
For sure, yeah. It was something that always stood out for me years ago that feeds into that little bit. I remember reading it in Fortean Times probably 10 years ago. And unfortunately, I can't remember who wrote it. It might have been you, I don't know. But
No, probably not, but go on.
it was in the Ghost Watch segment. And
Definitely not me.
okay. And so it's just probably just an aside, but it was always interesting to me is they were saying how anyone who ever has a paranormal experience 95% of the time, they're not expecting to have a paranormal
No.
experience. Um, Obviously, you have ghost hunters, etc., who have put things in their journals and records. But yeah, 95% of the time you're not. And I would say that probably goes for most strange experiences. What have you got to say to that?
Oh, no, absolutely right. The
Yeah.
most intense strange experiences almost all are involuntary. So, and I wouldn't presume to know about ghost hunting, but I think
Mm,
I watch a lot of podcasts on the paranormal, and um, particularly things like Paranormal Monkey, where he has a lot of ghost hunters on. Um, and I'll be honest, I sweat through these. I watch them all in the gym
yeah.
on YouTube. So towards the end of a workout, sometimes I'm missing things because I'm that knackered. But um, certainly ghost hunts occasionally, they're informed, increasingly informed by what goes on television.
Mm,
Certainly in the case of ufology, if people go looking for the experiences, they're very unlikely to have them. The most
mm,
significant paranormal reports in that area, which I would presume to know best, are almost all things that either happened accidentally or things that started accidentally, and then people had to go and interact with them, like the military encounters, for example. Um,
like
and
Rendlesham and stuff like that, do you mean?
sorry,
Like Rendlesham, for example,
yeah,
military encounters. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's a whole box of frogs. That
Sorry,
one.
let's get on to that in a minute. Sorry, finish what you were saying. Sorry, I
Well, no,
interrupted.
but
Yeah.
you're right. They're by and large the experiences are involuntary. So yeah, that is the nature of it. And I mean, one thing that's been common in ufology is that when people have organized things like sky watches or whatever, it's also been a magnet for hoaxes. There was an infamous case in about 1970, Cradle Hill in Wiltshire, Uh, Long story short, but a bunch of scientists hoaxed a skywatch, and the UFO event they created turned up in Flying Saucer Review,
Oh,
and it was analysed as a genuine UFO sighting. At which point the hoaxers came forward and said, "Well, no, it isn't."
oh,
And
goodness me. I've just
yeah,
written that down. I don't know that one, Cradle Hill.
it's in. I'm trying to think. It's in off the top of my head. I could send you an email about it later.
Yeah.
I think the best account of it is in a book called The Flying Sorcerers by Andy Roberts and Dave Clark, which you virtually can't get now. But yeah,
Okay.
Cradle Hill in I think 1970. It turned up in a BBC Horizon program in the 80s.
Right.
Um, the only ufologists I could think of that regularly went to work, knowing full well that they were like to have a sighting, were the guys at Project Hesteland, which is there's a valley in north of Norway which has got paranormal legends about it.
All
But
right.
effectively, there are weird lights in the valley that become very active at certain points, and
Oh.
they were quite literally on fire in the 1980s, and that meant that a team of researchers could. I mean, this is Norway in January, freezing,
Hmm.
but northern Norway in January. But a team of researchers were camped out there and actually observed them. And now nobody claims they're extraterrestrial. It's bizarre atmospheric phenomena which we're getting closer to understanding, but it's still full of
Yeah.
mystery.
That does seem to go on in quite a lot of places, doesn't it? That they're
Mm.
starting to call bizarre atmospheric phenomenon. What's that? There's an area in is it North Dakota where people have been gathering for years to watch the lights? Oh, is it North? I
Yeah.
can't remember. Yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, but
And
the whole thing about I mean, what I know it's been tainted by television and popularity or whatever, but um, the area around Skinwalker Ranch had legends going back to First Nations people.
mm,
So it's and the Hesterland Valley similarly had all sorts of paranormal legends around it, and it was not particularly it was random. These phenomena were randomly seen by reindeer herders and people who were traveling through the area for a
mm.
long time. And then it was only fairly recently it was settled, and then it was really the most significant investigation was when it all kicked off in the 1980s, and like I said, a team of four researchers were able to go up there and camp out and, use radar, video, photography, and even fire a laser beam at one of them and hit it.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
yeah, which was interesting because it reacted, which gave them ideas about, this atmospheric plasmas and how it might all be working. It seems to be some bizarre combination of the geology, the tectonic stress, the climate, which can be very, very
Yeah,
cold. Um,
yeah,
but it's on the way to being solved. But that's an interesting case.
yeah. Okay, I'll look that one up. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left, so let's cram some stuff in. So, did you have cast your mind back, Neil? Did you have a strange experience of your own that first got you interested in this subject, or was it someone else's story that they told you? Did you grow up in a family that already did this sort of thing? Just want to know what it was that
No,
got you
I'm of
interested.
an age when I thought space was really exciting because there was a race for the moon when I was a tiny kid, and that all that got me
Hmm.
excited. And there's a whole long story. My best guess, if I'm honest, I've always been fascinated by this stuff. Um, without going down a rabbit hole, I've explored in a few other interviews about my life has been really normal, other than the circumstances around my birth, which were a bit odd, which
Oh,
probably gave me a propensity for always being questioning and trying to figure out things for myself. And I think it's no accident then that the things I've done best in academia, getting stuck into the paranormal, or even just being insatiable with regard to finding weird music for my radio show.
yeah.
They're all about just exploring things and being very comfortable when I'm surrounded by stuff that is I can't possibly understand completely, but just trying to make sense out of that. I'm probably more comfortable in those circumstances than most people would be. So the paranormal is a very good fit and will be until I can't do anything else.
I see what you mean with I also enjoy things that are obscure and esoteric, and I think that's kind
Yeah,
of one of the things that got me into I find myself gravitating towards anything that's out of place or incongruous in general.
yeah.
Um even things like uh, tiny communities of Welsh people in Patagonia, for example, things like
Yeah,
that. That fascinates me because it's so out of place. And I
yeah.
guess it's a sort of train of thought similar to enjoying the
It is, yeah.
paranormal too.
Because I'm totally with that. I'm always intrigued by things, and it's just when you discover that the strangest possibilities are actually true, then you want to know more about them. Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, I was talking to a mate the other day, so I've got this radio show and we play quite obscure stuff, and he was asking me, well, what's the best thing you've heard this year?
Hmm.
And album of the year so far, if nothing better arrives, is a thing called The Wheels of Oman by a band called Lunatic. And
God,
how
don't
the
like that
hell did
sound.
these people come to exist? I can't imagine you're going to groove to it, Kit. There's me and about 2,000 people in the world think this is genius. But
You'd be surprised what I listen to.
they're a,
Yeah.
they're a, they're a trio of Japanese women, and it's almost as if they've just channeled the mid 1970s British band Gone, who were just
Oh
on
yeah.
another, yeah, Flying Teapot, those
Yeah,
guys.
yeah.
It's almost like if you imagine them reincarnated as three young Japanese women in 2025, they've got an entire imaginary world which they're exploring by way of sort of prog rock, but very modern 2025 prog rock. And I just find it's like, Smooth FM would look at my date of birth and my financial status and assume I'm one of theirs. And, no, give me Lunatic any day. And it's the same thing. That's my Welsh Patagonians. That's the
Yeah.
same. Absolutely, I totally get it.
Oh, I'm the same. Yeah, I'm heavy metal guy and jazz, and it's the more extreme the better, really. You
Yeah,
know, there's a extreme metal band called Miss Sugar who use all these different tight polyrhythms within their music, and it's like they've transplanted African beat, West African polyrhythms into heavy metal. And it goes round for 64 bars and then meets up again. It's just incredible. And I put it on and I'm sat down intently listening to it, waiting for it to come back round. And then people go, "Oh, what's this noise?" Oh, they lose the plot about
yeah.
it. So,
But absolutely. So let's conclude this with the thought that we're fellow
yeah,
travelers, Kit. I mean,
yeah,
more than anything, if people like us get together and talk and go to conferences and stuff, I find that life affirming, and also that's the thing that more than anything would just spark off different trains of thought to try and make sense of it.
agreed. Neil, it's been absolutely marvelous, and maybe I'll be able to get you back one day, maybe to talk
Yeah,
about more specific cases and things as well. Um,
yeah, more than happy, Kit. Yeah, thank you.
where can people find you? Here's your book.
Oh, I mean, mystery book. Oh, yeah, right. Hey, snap.
You got 40 seconds.
That's going to my mate Tony. It probably Amazon. There's one or two. I mean, the last place I saw it on the shelf was Watkins Books in London, which is apart from anything else, go to Watkins Books because it's whatever you find in there will probably be really interesting. But yeah, Amazon most of the time, but one or two specialist stockists do have it.
Brilliant. Neil Nixon,
Cheers, man.
thank you for your
Right.
time.
Yeah, thank you, Kit. All right. Go
I'll
well. Cheers.
speak to you soon. Thank you, mate.
Bye.